Today is a very auspicious day, since it is the 18th of the 12th Tibetan month, which is just a couple of weeks away from Losar, Tibetan New Year. And this is the day that which is actually in the Nyingma tradition is a big deal, the anniversary of Longchen Rabjam. And since we happen to be studying the writing of Longchen Rabjam in combination with um, other great masters, um, today, then I thought that's auspicious and just ought to mention it. It's Longchen Rabjam, I think, passed away in 1363, so that would make it something like, I think, 656 years since he passed away. And since that time, really, Longchen Rabjam's teachings have remained as the quintessential expositions, teachings, and also pith instructions on the view and practice of the great perfection. So that down to the present day, we still have persons achieving enlightenment and showing incredible signs at the time of passing, and in general benefiting sentient beings, thanks to Longchen Rabjam. And I would say for all of us who are emulating his example, following in his footsteps, following the tradition, the lineage, we're very fortunate that we actually have not just the actual pith instructions in terms of the view, but also in terms of the practice. So we have a whole lineage of how this is put into practice. I think it's very difficult to approach something like Dzogchen and the teachings of Longchen Rabjam without actually what we call the blessing of the lineage, an intangible insight that is permeated by the warmth and love, devotion, and so forth, that is implicit in the transmission and is essential really in accessing this practice, which is very, very subtle. We should keep in mind it's very doable, but it's also something that's very subtle. And so we're very fortunate that we have actual guides in accessing the path of the great perfection. So we actually last time, all the way from Chile, wonderful. Good. So we have a large classroom here. We're a very extensive, we could say widely spread classroom. So we looked last time at this, which is Longchen Rabjam's presentation then of what is originating from the soul offspring tantra, one of the 17 Dzogchen tantras, which has then been somewhat elaborated upon by Garab Dorje. And then with Longchen Rabjam, then he, as we saw last time in the couple letters, the precious couple letters from the Bima Nyingtik, which is from the 4 sections of the heart essence, then we have these 7 themes that are going to be basic to the reflections that we're undertaking here. Impermanent, fleeting and lasting happiness, the various circumstances that lead to death, the pointlessness of all mundane endeavors, the virtues of the Buddhas, the Guru's instructions, and non-conceptuality. By the way, over on your left side, you have a short supplication that you see many places to Longchen Rabjam. And this is then in the translation of the Padmakara translation group. Equaling compassion, learning, realization to the 2 supreme ones and 6 adornments of the world. Still you trained, austerely hidden in the sacred forest. Longchenpa, you who know samsara and nirvana as the Dharmakaya, Jigme Lingpa, noble one, to you I pray. So even though Longchen Rabjam was equal in compassion, learning, and realization as the great masters of India, he still practiced in this. The sacred forest, I think, here refers to Samye Chimpu and also Gangri Turka, two caves that Longchen Rabjam practiced in. And Longchen Rabjam is then also known as Jigme Lingpa. So here he writes, contemplating impermanence. On an outer level, time is impermanent. The four seasons come and go. Day and night come and go as well, changing moment by moment. On an inner level, the four aggregates and the four elements are impermanent as well. Constantly changing, they are as fragile and insubstantial as a mass of bubbles. On a secret level, your parent and loved ones are impermanent and will die. So this is also a structure that we see in Words of My Perfect Teacher, looking at the various dimensions of impermanence. We can all see how the four seasons come and go. We can all see how the years slip by very quickly. We can see how day and night slips by very quickly. These are, of course, not, you could say, scientific discoveries that come as a shock. We know this, but what really actually is shocking, if you think about it, is the degree to which we sort of just accept it and don't really realize how time is passing. And particularly then in the Buddhist context, time passing is not just a how do you say, a cause for melancholic reflection that our life is running out, but it's really an encouragement to do something. And that's where the reflection on impermanence has so much value in terms of being something that spurs us on, that makes us realize how every moment is the moment for practice, so we don't postpone practice. So the outer levels are the seasons that we can see, or the time outside. We can see all of us. On an inner level, we have also quite obviously the aggregations of our bodies and so forth, our minds, which are constantly changing. And then on a secret level, what you could say it's secret because only we know who actually, this is sort of, you could say, private information, our parents and our loved ones, those to whom we are attached, they also are impermanent and will die. So we are in this very volatile situation, but there's something that we can do about it, and that's the point here. And the point is then we have a precious human rebirth. Longchen Rabjam says, when will you find yourself in the same situation? There is no, meaning we have this unique opportunity. There is no way to be sure that you will not die this very day or tomorrow. Without getting distracted for even a moment, ask yourself wholeheartedly, I wonder if I will die this evening, or perhaps tomorrow. Like Nagarjuna, he says, breathing out, there's no certainty that we'll be breathing in again. Going to sleep in the evening, there's no certainty we'll wake in the morning. All beings that you see will die as well. So meditate on the thought, when will these beings pass away? So very often you actually see this formulation, if I were to die, or if I died, and so on. And there's absolutely no if in this. It's absolutely certain. And nobody's going to enjoy dying. It will be tough. It will be very tough. And especially us who are brought up in a culture where every discomfort is attended to, there's one thing that cannot be eliminated. One discomfort that is inevitable, and that is that we're going to pass away. Contemplating in this way will help you to see that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent by nature. Seeing them as examples of impermanent will help your mind become more focused. So when we say conditioned phenomena, it basically means all phenomena in the sense that everything that comes together comes undone. It might not be obvious, but even in the, what's it called again, the periodic table, we talk about the halvation, half-time of basically any element, right? It might be a very long time, but everything that is conditioned is by nature impermanent. Everything that is constructed is by nature impermanent. And contemplating the examples that we have around us, it'll make the mind focus, because we have a direction. So not to get morbid, but rather to galvanize, regroup our focus. This is the gauge to whether or not you have mastered this practice, seeing the degree to which we are focused. The purpose of meditating in this manner is to turn your mind away from samsara. So we might be caught up in superficial worries and speculations. And very often, of course, we need to be practical. We're not saying to not be practical. We obviously do. But practicality is not samsara, actually. That's just dealing with our world around us. But when we get caught up in what we call the kleshas, the reactive patterns of our self-centering, and also the patterns that come with that, that's where samsara is a place, you could say, that is afflicted. And that's where we want to decide that, given that we have this opportunity, then knowing that it's impermanent, we need to be determined. So that's meditating on impermanence. Contemplating fleeting and lasting happiness. Now remember, here in the Nyingtik tradition, these mind changes slightly different from some of the mind changes that we find elsewhere. The implication is the same, but the formulation and reflections might differ slightly. Again, the objective is, of course, the same, to generate determination. So contemplating fleeting and lasting happiness, negative acts produce the lower realms and all forms of suffering, whereas virtue creates the higher realms and all forms of happiness. By their very nature, the higher and lower realms of samsara are like the paddles on a water wheel. So, like Paltrimbaja says, we're in samsara. There might be times where we are high and happy and blissful, and it's just like a bee in a jar. We might be in the upper part of the jar, or we might be undergoing tremendous suffering in the lower realms, but regardless, we're caught. One of the differences between the higher and lower realms, apart from being places of suffering and happiness, and here I'm quoting Tsongsa Rinpoche, is that in the higher realms we have more a sense of what it is that brings about our happiness. So we can be more creative with regards to providing the actions that have an impact on happiness, and avoid the actions that create suffering. In the lower realms, there's less awareness around this and less conditions for seeing this. Fluctuating and ephemeral, samsara is deeply flawed. The most profound way to avoid being caught up in samsara is to attain enlightenment and liberation. Everything else is unreliable and deceptive. So within a dream, we might go up and down, having happiness and suffering. We might work towards happiness in our dream and so on. But it's really only when we awaken completely that we are free of the conditions within the dream. So that's why we mean that everything else is unreliable and deceptive. On the other hand, if you enter the path of liberation, you will attain the temporary pleasures of the higher realms, and sublime qualities will take birth in your beings, as they have in the bodhisattvas. You will attain the lasting happiness of supreme enlightenment, just like the Buddhas. For these reasons you should think, I must achieve temporary and ultimate sublime happiness. So we are not operating here with a vague religious assumption that if we're on the right path, everything is going to be okay. It's simply working with what we could call the phenomenology of awakening. It's working with the conditions of our mind. We ourselves know our mind. Yes, it cannot be quantified and measured objectively, but we know what's happening within our mind. And we can work creating the conditions that bring us to experience happiness. And that is what happens on the path. So that's where we follow the examples of the sages who, within this world, have happiness, but yet their objective is not just temporary happiness, but ultimate freedom, insight that goes beyond the ordinary confused projections. And so understanding what it is that drives confusion, what it is that are the causes for awakening, then this is again the places or the reasons why we should think. These two styles of happiness we call temporary, which is the happiness within samsara, within our dualistic perception, and then the other happiness is liberation, the ultimate freedom, where we then can in a greater way be there for all sentient beings. If you do not enter the path of liberation, non-virtue will lead you to the lower realms. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of a, sometimes really depends. Sometimes there's a little bit of a tendency towards the self-centered afflictions that drive suffering. So we could say there sometimes is a downward spiraling tendency. And that's where we need to be aware that we need to be very proactive in engaging on the path of liberation. Even if the virtue you have practiced leads you to a birth in the higher realms, you will eventually have to journey through the lower realms. So as long as we are stuck within this conditioning, we go up and down. There's no predetermined path that we're going to go higher and higher. I know in some New Age context, there's the notion that, oh, I learned something in this life and I'll build on that in future lives. So I came into this life to learn something. I'm afraid in Buddhism, we don't really see any basis for that kind of assumption. That would mean that there would be either somebody who's pulling you through, and this is something, of course, in the context of Madhyamika teachings and so on, we can look into. We should consider the possibilities, but there's not really any basis for assuming this is going to happen. Personally, in my life, I have gone up and also come down, and gone up and come down. So this seems to be the general tendency of the dualistic, confused mind. So when you think wholeheartedly that all activities end up causing suffering, you will have familiarized yourself with this mind training. And here we're referring to the ordinary self-centered concerns. The purpose of meditating in this way is to elicit a feeling of disenchantment and disillusionment with the suffering of samsara. So it's very easy to get caught up with and fascinated with aspects of samsara. And that's where it's important that we're not attached to these. Of course, yes, it's wonderful if we have a good meal or a vacation, but that's all right. But as long as we're not, let's say, dependent on it, there needs to be a place where we see through the fascination with these superficial events. Contemplating the various circumstances that lead to death. When born in samsara, there is nothing that you can rely on or trust. When you try to help someone, you may be harmed in return. Even food and drink can lead to illness or death. Whatever material wealth you manage to hoard could end up fulfilling the desires of your enemies and thieves. So samsara is by nature a delusional projection. There's nothing reliable about it. It's deceptive phenomena. And as we know within samsara, anything can happen. So when we help someone, you may be harmed in return. That doesn't mean that if we help someone with good intention, the value of that intention doesn't have great benefit. But at the same time, there's no predicting how things turn out. Even food and drink can lead to illness and death. So as we know, we can I remember living in France where there's a lot of good food. And one of my friends once says, there's places in the world where people die from no food. And around here, some of us die from eating too much. Whatever material wealth you manage to hoard could end up fulfilling the desires of your enemies and thieves. Hoping that your friends and loved ones will help you, you may imagine that they will bring you benefit. But these same people may become your worst enemies. So if we look around us, we see things like this. Or even if they do not actually harm you, they may insult you or disparage you for no reason. So we have these disappointments in life where this happens. Whatever you do, it will not satisfy others. Indeed, worldly activities are endless and deeply problematic. I think particularly modern people are actually aware of this, despite the paradox that modern people more than ever are tangled up in their activities. I think there is very often an insight that all this busyness is purposeless and certainly problematic. Of course, what we are saying here then with the vision of enlightenment is that there are some activities which really are valuable, and we should let go of the lesser insignificant activities. If you sincerely consider the attitudes and behavior of others, you will see that though you may try to help them, some will be satisfied while others will not. You can please some of the people some of the time. No matter how you look at it, you can see with certainty that all of this is useless. All that you do is imbued with the nature of suffering. Now, with that we mean that every time something is done on the basis of the dualistic perception of me and the object, self and other, and so forth, there's always this, you could say, binary situation like pleased, displeased, successful, not successful. So our actions are always caught up within time and space, and they're assessed in terms of being what we want or not what we want. So in this way, we're always operating within a conditionality that sets us up to suffer. So there are innumerable circumstances that lead to illness and death. So overall, you could say everything is permeated by suffering. And as far as us getting ill and dying, there's lots of circumstances. In Buddhism, you often read there's far more circumstances that lead to death than that lead to life. As these circumstances do not produce any real benefit, the only infallible object to rely on are your Guru and the three jewels. So this is where we find safety from samsara. This is the refuge. For this reason, if you cultivate devotion and make offerings to them, you will be setting in motion the causes of happiness. So celebrating the value of the three jewels, we make offerings. We take refuge in them from the bottom of our heart. We delight in their liberation, and we have this soft spot of deep, humble appreciation, devotion. And this is what then creates lasting happiness. Think to yourself, I must focus solely on virtue. With this in mind, reflect on all the good and bad circumstances of the past, what you're doing in the present, and what you will do in the future. Cultivate a sense of disenchantment. Again, here, disenchantment doesn't mean depression or sort of pointlessness, purposelessness. Rather, it means that there is purpose, and what we want then is to prioritize what has purpose and not be tangled up with what is futile. And that's what we mean with cultivating disenchantment. And then focus our mind on what is constructive. When compassion toward all classes of sentient beings manifest and you enthusiastically think of all your activities as an offering to the three jewels in your Guru, you will have mastered this mind training. Meditating in this way serves to elicit the prerequisite of faith. So there's a question here. This is a general Ngondro question. Any advice for getting out of bed in the morning? Seems to be the biggest obstacle for practice for me, being able to get out of the warmth and comfort of my bed when it's early in the morning and my head is all foggy with sleep. That's a very good that's a very good question. Yes, the sound of damarus. You know, the Longchen Ngondro, they actually have yoga of waking up, where you sit up straight. Jigme Lingpa, he always says, when you wake up in the morning, sit up straight. So yes, a little bit of courage, you know. We're delicate creatures, right? But we're not that delicate. So with a bit of courage, you know, imagine you're trying to impress somebody, you know, sit up, and then we think of the guru, the presence of the guru, surrounded by dakas and dakinis playing damaras and so on. I once heard that Ziga Control's mother, and Longchen Rabjam's mother, that when she would wake up in the morning, she'd literally play her damara. Now, what also helps is to be determined from the night before. You decide, so you go to sleep with this determination to get up, and then you have all sorts of tricks. You know, the alarm clock in the other end of the bed and so on. But if you have a certain, you know, you need certain amount of sleep, you know, 7-8 hours, then make sure you get that. So it starts happening already in the evening, the night before. But wake up with this courage, and then also, when you wake up, then sit a little bit. Allow the mind to be present. And also, you can think that the space is full of damaru playing dakas and dakinis. Okay, safe travels. Okay, contemplating the pointlessness of all mundane endeavors. So this is the point of futility. Remember how Milarepa, when he went back to his childhood home, and he among the ruins of his childhood home, he found the bones, what he figured probably most likely was the bones of his mother, and he sat there and just contemplated the futility of the world. Longchen Rabjam, he says, the day you die, all of the things that you have done in your present life will do you no good. This includes protecting your loved ones, thwarting your enemies, engaging in farm work. This is just general business, right? Seeking to profit from business dealings, pursuing material gain and fame, getting caught up in attachment and aversion, benevolently counseling others, chasing after influence and a good reputation, making friends and enjoying material pleasures with your loved ones, and making a home for yourself. All these things that we do, eventually they will have no meaning. Indeed, everything that you have done in the past is now nothing more than a memory, like last night's dream. It won't come again. What you experience today is like this evening's dream. So this experience we're having right now is no more than when this evening comes around, it will be just like a dream. You sit there about to go to bed, and you'll think back at the present moment. It'll just be like a dream. And this is how it will be when we leave this life. In our life, and particularly in the modern world, there is so much preoccupation with achievement on a very superficial level of just immediate gratification and satisfaction just for this life, that a discourse has developed around what comes after this life, which is a completely insincere science about what happens, and very often just lapsing into a very convenient cliches. Like we'll say, somebody who's passed away will say, oh, they have gone to their maker, or now they have found peace. And we say these things. And of course, at the time of being with bereaved, we shouldn't say anything else. We should say just that. But seriously, have we found peace when we pass away? We should really look into it. And this is, of course, what's implicit in the science that we're speaking about here, knowledge of consciousness. This is not something that can be understood through the ordinary science that just looks at objective phenomena. It needs to be gauged through settling into an experience of that which is intangible and not conditioned by the physical body. So the science that we have in the Buddhist teaching is that there will be experience once we pass away. And that's why we want to focus on something that really has impact. It also doesn't mean that we begin to deny the value of this life and so on. In fact, it's like Jigme Lingpa just said, it's a win-win situation. In practicing the Dharma, we're happy in this life and we're happy in the next life. But it's important that we don't mix up or get our priorities wrong. Longchen Rabjam goes on to say, what a waste to have spent your time on pointless pursuits, getting caught up in attachment and aversion, quarreling with others, hoping to hear pleasant things and not to hear anything unpleasant, pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain, accumulating, hoarding things, and so on. So it's important that we see this clearly. It doesn't mean that we should not seek to please others or help them accumulate what they need. We should be there for others, of course. And they might not be interested in hearing that they're going to pass away. So we don't need to lay that on them unless we're asked. So we should, of course, serve others with whatever they might want. But we, for ourselves, should have that discerning, that insight that this ultimately is pointless. See if there's any questions about that. Okay, seems everybody agrees. That's good. Contemplating the virtues of the Buddha. For the fifth mind training, think to yourself, the Buddha transcended all the shortcomings of samsara. His form radiated the marks and signs of complete enlightenment. His speech turned the wheel of Dharma, while his mind never wavered from the state of wisdom. So this is what we call the body, speech, and mind of the enlightened one. And this is very important in understanding both the condition of samsara and nirvana. We have this you could say, situation of having body, speech, and mind. So in this case, the enlightened body, speech, and mind manifested for us in this world, with the Buddha manifesting in this way. Indeed, he was the sublime guide of the entire world, including the gods. He was its sole protector and support. For these reasons, I must attain Buddhahood as well. For without doing so, I will not be of any benefit. Moreover, since Buddhahood cannot be attained without meditating, it is essential that I do so. I must practice with perfect concentration, following the example of the amazing accomplished masters of the past, who endured hardships and lived in isolated places on their quest for liberation. Just as they did, I must cast aside all activities of this life and practice alone in a remote place. Sometimes we speak about something that is actually a form of laziness when we think, oh, I can't be like the masters of the past. They were so great. The Buddha was so great. I can't do that. And that kind of self-deprecation is rather pointless and ultimately really just a form of laziness. The Buddha demonstrated the path not to show off or to appear extraordinary, but rather to show how it's done within the context of this world. And that's why so often you have people who say, oh yeah, the Buddha, well, he was just an ordinary human. And while we can say the Buddha's experience of enlightenment was certainly beyond the ordinary scope, then yes, his external example is really intended to make us feel, yes, this is what needs to be done. So while we might not have a situation where we can live in isolated places, we can certainly endeavor in taking out little chunks of isolation, which is where we sit down and meditate. This we can do, and we can set some certain boundaries. Now we sit for 1 hour, 2 hours, half an hour, 5 minutes. We can set these boundaries. This is also sowing the seed for, you would say, for more and more enhancing our practice. You will have mastered this practice when you think, I must meditate, since without doing so, it won't be possible to attain Buddhahood. This will serve to strengthen your resolve in meditation. So we have this famous example from Words of My Perfect Teacher with Karakumchong, who, whenever he would go out to pee, then on his way back there'd be this bush that would rip his clothes. And he thought, oh, I should really cut that bush. But then he would go, no, but anyway, first I need to meditate. And then he would go back. And the saying goes, the bush was never trimmed, but Karagumchum attained enlightenment. Oh, long question here. If you have questions, don't make them too long, please. So I think this looks more like a comment. Another day, I saw a very beautiful waking up message from the Khyentse Yangtze. I don't know how to do big Dzogchen thing, but one thing I do know, every morning when I wake up, I pray to my teacher, Guru Rinpoche, Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche. I don't know what will happen. Let me at least try to be a better human being, not falling into the ocean of desire, clinging to self, dualism, ignorance, laziness, hatred, jealousy. May I at least properly walk on the bridge of mindfulness, kindness, discipline. Even impossible I can become great like my predecessor, doesn't matter. At least let me be a good student of Dharma, a good human being, and help people to do that way. That's what I really want to follow, and I hope you can follow in your own way, in your own path. Oh, that's very nice. Thank you for sharing that. So that's from Dilgu Khyentse Yangtze Rinpoche. Very, very nice. So that's the kind of courage we should wake up with. Thank you. Contemplating the Guru's instructions, which is what we just had there. For this mind training, ponder the reasons for practicing the Guru's instructions. Consider how the Guru is the one who will guide you across the boundless ocean of samsara to liberation. Like Khyentse Yangtze was saying, this bridge, right? The Guru's instructions, like a great vessel, will liberate you. For this reason, you should practice your Guru's teaching to the letter. For if you do not, you will be perpetually tormented by the illness of suffering. So now we have this opportunity. We have the circumstances where we can practice. We have the human rebirth. We have the circumstances. We have a teacher who has given us instructions. If we don't take that opportunity now, then we'll be stuck in suffering. With great affection, the Guru is like the king of doctors. You must practice the Guru's nectar-like instructions diligently day and night. You will have mastered this practice when you think, what's the point of all the things I do in this present life? I should practice the Guru's instruction and nothing else. This will keep you perfectly focused on your Guru's instructions without getting caught up in other activities. So this is where we also look at the lives of the masters of the past. Again, not as people who did impossible things, but rather persons who actually showed us very elegantly, peacefully. They didn't come and hammer on our door and say, you got to do like I did. They demonstrated it, and then they left people alone and were there whenever they were asked for it, teaching and so forth. But the sages of the past demonstrating how to do things is really something that we should aspire to follow. And so with that in mind, then we have individuals who really show us how to engage with this particular mind training, the value of the Guru's instruction. So, contemplating in this way, what's the point of all the things I do in this present life? I should practice the Guru's instructions and nothing else. Again, this is not about behavior. It's not about us, all of a sudden, acting differently, but it's from within, this attitude from within. It's an attitude of intelligence and an attitude of kindness and compassion. It sees clearly what needs to be done. Now, the next chapter is contemplating non-conceptuality. I'd like to say with regards to that, this being in the context of the Great Perfection, which is generally regarded as very advanced yoga, the persons undertaking this practice are very often assumed to have a lot of familiarity with yoga practice, both meditation but also yoga in terms of nadi, prana, and bindu. And so the next contemplation, which is about contemplating non-conceptuality, is not just thinking about non-conceptuality, it's actually engaging in it. So this is a little bit different. I'm not even sure we can say contemplating non-conceptuality. Here we actually go into practicing non-conceptuality. And what we mean with non-conceptuality is not that we're sitting there and we don't have thoughts. It's the nature of our mind to have thoughts. What we're speaking about when we say non-conceptuality is not a condition of stopping those thoughts to all of a sudden have a different state of mind where we are not thinking. Thinking happens. What is important is that we're not distracted, tangled up, that we're not tagging along mindlessly with the thoughts that arise. We can sit and we can be aware. And just like many teachers would say, you just look at, sometimes the mind is calm, sometimes it's moving. So just like we look at a river without necessarily being swept by, then we also sit and we're aware of what's happening in the mind, and we do that with settling the mind, which is the practice of shamatha. And that's where there's different practices of shamatha. In the context of the Siddhartha's intent, we're actually quite fortunate to have many who practiced with Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And so you have datuns in various places that are led by students of Trungpa Rinpoche. And Trungpa Rinpoche was really extraordinary as a master of the Great Perfection who formulated and taught this particular way of engaging in non-conceptuality to the modern world. And so I would warmly recommend, if you have the opportunity, to learn either from the Shambhala tradition or from students of Chögyam Trungpa the way of practicing sitting. They call it sitting practice or shamatha vipassana. Of course, if you're already someone who for years has been practicing tummo and are familiar with the blazing and the dripping and so forth, then of course, then that is itself simplicity and, you could say, fusing the experience with great bliss. Likewise, also we're going to look at some other methods here. But I would say really for us who are new to the practice of meditation, persons such as myself, then this approach of sitting practice is probably the most helpful. Of course, these techniques that we hear about here, they sound fun. They sound like really interesting and far out, and we visualize things and so on. But the real sort of experience in non-conceptuality really comes about through a simplicity, which I think for many people would come about through a method that is as simple as possible. Also here in Australia, then weekly, I lead some practices also where we approach this non-conceptuality from this angle. It's very, you could say, accommodating because it accommodates both advanced practitioners who already are practicing great perfection of Mahamudra, and also people who are completely new to meditation. So we also do retreats on this, and in general, this is something that is really essential for any practice that we do. We all know that we could be doing the most advanced practice, yet we're caught up either in distraction or in emotion or some, you could say, attitudes and so on. So to soften the mind and be comfortable with the condition of our mind. Very important to engage then in this practice of non-conceptuality according to how we actually are, according to where we are. Anyway, in the context of the present teaching on the Great Perfection, then indeed we have some teachings then on cultivating non-conceptuality. And the first is then the samadhi, or the non-conceptuality of bliss emptiness. So here Longchen Rabjam says, to train the mind in the non-conceptuality of bliss emptiness, imagine the syllable hum at the upper end of your central channel, up here, and syllable and an R syllable at your navel, 4 fingers below the navel. So I would say, I'm not going to go too much into this, because if you've already been doing this, then of course you pretty much know how it is. And if you haven't done it before, I think then you need to have it really shown to you by someone who is greatly accomplished in this. Not just somebody who's heard the teachings, but somebody who actually really has the experience in this. So then fire blazes forth from the R and hits the hum, causing a stream of nectar to descend, filling our 4 root chakras and all the secondary chakras. This in return causes bliss emptiness to arise. As you visualize this, pull the lower energy up, press the upper energy down, and focus on a white R syllable at your heart center. This will produce the empty knowledge that utilizes the skillful means of bliss. So, I would say, hearing this for the first time, we should make aspirations that may we practice this. And the gist of this, really, fusing or experiencing non-thought through bliss emptiness, is just settling into a great comfort, a great sense of confidence, bliss emptiness, where whatever arises is left unto its own and naturally liberates. And in this way, then, bliss emptiness sustains this freedom from thought. So this is a very profound path associated with the practice of prana practice. So we should aspire that we may engage with this path at one point. And like I said, if you're already doing that, that's wonderful. The non-conceptuality of clarity emptiness. To train the mind in the non-conceptuality of clarity emptiness, begin by expelling the stale breath 3 times. As you inhale, imagine that all external appearances and objects melt into light, merge with blue space, and then completely fill your entire body. Finally, join and hold the energies. This will generate clarity emptiness. A vital point of this practice is to meditate that the energies are hot if a cold sensation is dominant, and cool if a hot sensation is more intense. Because different energies are active in different seasons, summer is associated with the fire energies, fall with the wind energies, winter with the water energies, and spring with the earth energies. There are more elaborate meditations that work with the energies that remedy these sensations, as well as on different forms and feelings. The energy of space, however, is good to practice at all times, and as physical sensations are included in these 2, hot and cold, this is sufficient for practice. So these 2 are methods then that come from the completion stage practices, both in terms of the general completion stage practices and more specifically from the Great Perfection practices. The final one then, the non-conceptuality of reality itself, is, you could say, the most subtle, but it is also something where this is something that probably we could practice. It's less involved with the nadi and pranas and so forth, and is something where we could possibly at this stage actually engage with a method like this. To train the mind in the non-conceptuality of reality itself, relax the body and mind from deep within. Without moving your eyes, meditate in a state free from the coming and goings of thoughts. This doesn't mean that we won't have thoughts, but it means that we're not distracted by them. So just like we're watching a river, we're not carried away by the river. So any thoughts will arise, and we're completely comfortable with that. By meditating in this way, you will be able to concentrate on whatever you direct your attention to, after which you will be able to rest for longer and longer periods in a non-conceptual space-like state. So that means that we're not distracted by occurrences. We can sustain this spacious presence, this awareness, regardless of whatever circumstances we might have. When the time comes to pass, you will have mastered this practice. This helps to develop bodhicitta more and more. This helps bodhicitta because this is the mind that is not held up in self-centering and the ordinary petty concerns. So it both is the mind of wisdom, and it's also the mind that sees through the barriers between ourselves and others, and naturally is more and more compassionate. So here are then Longchen Rabjam's concluding verses, because this is actually here where Longchen Rabjam finishes this teaching on these contemplations, and he prays, "May the virtue, as pristine as a snow mountain, from this work on the 7 forms of mind training, these vital points on the exceedingly profound preliminaries, lead all beings to the state of total peace. Through the propensities of having trained in past lives, in this life I have mastered the essential meaning of the Supreme Vehicle. Therefore, with the wish to benefit others in mind, I have revealed and clarified the profound nature. Fortunate ones, regard this point of entry to the profound essential meaning as your crown ornament. The sublime path, the chariot of those who desire liberation, will be swiftly accomplished based on these words." These essential instructions on the preliminary practice of the 7 forms of mind training were composed on the slopes of Kangli Turpa by Longchen Rabjam, a yogi of the Supreme Vehicle. These teachings have been entrusted to the glorious protectress of mantra, Ekajati, as well as Sa Rahula and the oath-bound Vajrasadhu. Should these teachings be corrupted with other words or changed, may they mete out a harsh punishment. Keep this secret from those who are not fit vessels. Grant it to those who are worthy. Secret Samaya. So this is then the instruction from Longchen Rabjam, and the place where he composed this is not far from Lhasa, about an hour's drive south of Lhasa. We can go there, up on the slopes across the, the Brahmaputra, right? The river. I think there's a bridge, and it's quite a hike, but it's possible to go to this place. And Longchenpa then entrusted these teachings to the 3 main protectors of the great perfection, Ekajati, Rahula, and Vajrasadhu. So non-conceptuality and non-duality are the same or different? And if different, what is the difference? Non-conceptuality could be non-duality if it's... Non-conceptuality really just means that there's not the entanglement in the thoughts. And non-duality is more the actual condition in which the delusional mind projects difference between what we call the cognizer and its display. So we would So we would talk about the nature of reality being free from this positioning of self and other. Non-conceptuality has more to do with the path and the method to have the insight into this. Do you suggest a reference of Trungpa where we can read about sitting practice? Yes, quite a few places. And I'll put up something in the Dropbox that you can read about. And otherwise, I would refer to a book which actually also contains teachings coming from the Great Perfection on the practice of meditation. It was published recently. It's called Mindfulness in Action. Mind you, it's not the old classic work, which is called Meditation in Action. It's called Mindfulness in Action. This is very, very helpful. Could you provide in the Dropbox to us an image of the body channels? I'm sure you can find that somewhere. And like I said, I'm a little bit wary of, if you're new to this, then if you're new to this, I would say stick more to just the sitting practice. How many people watching the webinar? Just curious. I don't know. Let's see, how many are we? So there's 83 people. So you have a classroom of 83. Mind you, there's more people who've signed up. I think something like 200. But you know, people, and as you know, you can access all the recordings in the Dropbox folder. Those non-conceptuality yogas look like the waking up yoga of the Longchen Ngondro. A little bit different, but you can actually practice, especially the last one, you can practice that first thing in the morning. So, thank you. You're welcome. Can you say something about the practice in summer, autumn, spring, summer, or where to find out more? No, because I haven't practiced this myself. And I would say, if you're going to look into this, make sure you study this from somebody who has really practiced this in depth and who's really attained realization. Somebody has deep compassion, deep wisdom as a result of practicing that. But anyway, we can aspire to it. And I think also in the trilogy of finding rest, I think maybe in the second volume you might find something there. Okay. So, all right. Well, we're just around the hour, and I think next, where is the Dropbox? So you would have received a mail about this, where you have the registration link, and just under the registration link, you also have the link to the Dropbox folder. And if for some reason you have lost that mail, then just shoot me a mail, and I'll send you the link. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for joining me in this study. And well, actually, I have from last time, just some chants of dedication. Also keeping in mind that this is then the very auspicious occasion of the, 656th anniversary of Longchen Rabjam's Nirvana. Through this virtue may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind in the pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection. May they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdom. Through all our birth, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we are born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night, realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning. May we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may we all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.